have to use that remote thing anymore. So we're doing it remotely.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I have no idea where to look for the audience, but, oh, there, hi. Welcome to the work session of Tuesday, March 1st. Can I get a motion, and we're having a joint meeting right now with the planning board. So first, can I get a motion from the town board to open the work session?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
That's the planning board for a similar motion to open our joint meeting with the town board. Is there such a motion?
Second.
I don't. So we're so out of practice. We've been trying this at home, working on it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll
I was
try this
hoping
again.
that maybe the meeting would be that much shorter. if we could just-
So Tom made the motion. Dick, you can do the second if you
Yeah,
like.
second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay,
Aye.
we're all set.
Okay, well, welcome.
Do we need a reading of anything?
No. Nope, we're here.
Welcome to all the members of the planning board. I don't know if, I mean, we're all wearing masks, but I know everyone. I don't know if you all do. So anyway, I'm Lisa Katz, the town supervisor. You can just go around, we can introduce ourselves.
Vicki Tip, Town Council Person and Deputy Supervisor.
Chris Hildenbrand, Town Councilman.
Kara Castle, Town Council Member.
Jeremy Solan, Councilman.
Eldad Godhelf, Planning Board Member.
Conan Ajmerad, Planning Board Member.
Tom Curley, Planning Board.
Dick Brownell, same thing.
Bob Kirkwood, planning board.
Perfect. So one of the reasons we wanted and we have staff back there, hi everybody. One of the reasons we wanted to meet, have a joint meeting with the planning board is because, well, we have issues that we know are gonna face the town, but really we wanna make sure that we have a great working relationship with the planning board. We rely on you for a lot. You have a lot of expertise that we do not have. And we wanna make sure that we have open lines of communication with issues that are coming up. I know there are times that we may be looking at something, then you're looking at something, and I want to make sure that we're communicating together. And certainly outside of a joint meeting, if there are any issues ever, you are always welcome to contact any of us, and I'm assuming that's vice versa. So, all right, well, fine. Everyone except no.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so there are a few things on our agenda today. The North Greeley zoning options, which I want to talk about, streamlining the planning board process, and then the proposed local law regarding an alternate planning board member. So I think those sort of go from difficult to easier. So why don't we start with the North Greeley zoning options?
Sure.
And you may have heard there was something the last couple of years, the form-based code, and that didn't obviously pass. But we do recognize, this whole town board, that certainly North Greeley is prime for, development and revitalization. It's kind of the ugliest street in our town, and there are obviously vacant properties there that we'd like to make sure get developed. And I will say that we're anticipating an application sometime in the near future regarding the Rite Aid property. So we do want to, make sure we start that discussion and figure out how we can most, expeditiously, while also, soliciting input from the town and really making sure that at least with respect to some of the vacant areas, we can, expedite any kind of zoning and how we would go about that. And, we have our ideas from the town board, but obviously, as I said before, you guys have much more experience there. I would like to say maybe we want to include overlay zones there. Certainly one of the things that I said, last year and the year before was I was not in favor of necessarily allowing 4 stories as of right building there, and certainly not 5. But that if it made sense for a particular project and there was something that the town was getting as a benefit with respect to a project, that it's something we could consider. So I wanted to really get your thoughts on that, how you best, and the town board as well, and how you best think we can go about, you know, figuring out how we're going to do this so that when applications do come, especially on North Greeley, it's something that we can start to look at quickly and it not take, you know, 3 or 4 years to, you know, build a project or to approve a project.
So if I may?
Sure.
I have a question about that. One is the process by which, the form that the legislation takes, and whether it's an overlay zone or whether, you know, the devices to be used. Have you pretty much settled on the content of the proposed legislation?
Oh, no.
Okay.
This is just really the beginning of the conversation.
Okay, very good.
I also would love to ask a question. And also, I wanted to say, really appreciate you suggesting and convening this joint meeting. I love it. I've been looking forward to it, and so great idea, and we should do it more often.
Agreed.
A couple questions following up on Tom's question. One is, you say that you expect potentially an application to come soon from the Rite Aid property. I mean, what do you know, what do you expect to come, and what might that look like, and how does that sort of jive with or conflict with the goal of rezoning some or all of the North Greeley corridor?
So, you know, I don't want to say too much because I don't know what's ultimately going to come formally before the board. They did, and I made sure I was allowed to say this, you know, they did write a letter to the whole town board saying this is, you know, something we think we're going to be coming with a proposal. But I don't know what that's ultimately going to look like. My thought is it's going to be a combination of retail and residential. That's
And the
gonna-
proposal would be, but as, to build as of right, or a rezoning, or an overlay, or a variance? I mean, do you have any idea?
So I think, I mean, my guess is it's gonna be more than 3 stories. But that's up to us to really decide what we are, you know, think is appropriate and what we can tolerate as a town. Certainly, if they came to us with an 8-story building, you know, we would say no. But, you know, if they come with a 3-story building, is that a yes? If they come with a 4-story building, is that a yes? Like, it depends what they're giving us. I mean, my personal view is this needs to be done. If they come to us with something, no matter what our zoning is, even under current zoning, we have to consider any application that comes before us. So I'm just trying to sort of preempt some of that to say.
That's exactly, you took the word right out of my mouth. Are you thinking of preempting some of that application or another application by doing something a little bit more comprehensive than just reacting to one application at a time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of both. I think if we know as a town board and a planning board that we want to incentivize development there and we really want to encourage applications, even if we didn't think anything was being brought, we certainly want to encourage, you know, applications to be brought to revitalize that area of town. So, you know, some of it is thinking, well, what can we definitely agree to as of right? Certainly current zoning we can agree to as of right. You know, and then just to talk about if we think, you know, depending on the project, how you guys would envision in the future. We never really talked, even during the form-based code, too much about, well, do you guys want to see 6 stories? Do you want to see 5? Do you want to see 3 or 1? Or and do you want retail? Do you not want retail? You know, obviously we want to make sure we're incorporating public opinion on this as well. That's something that's very important to me. But I will say I spoke to many members of the public in the last year, I'd say, and I think that most people do want retail, because as do the merchants, because they don't want to be the only merchants in a town without retail. But we also obviously want to incentivize residential coming in as well, because feet on the street is important. I don't believe in doing it as of right, other than under current zoning, because I want the planning board to have control over what's coming in. I think that was something that really bothered me with the form-based code, is that you guys have that expertise, you will make projects better, and I don't want to cut the planning board out of the process. So this was really a discussion to kind of hear from you guys too, as to what are your views on what should be there, and your tolerances and your preferences.
Well, I think, not to sound like a 6-year record, but one of the key things here, and I think the challenge for the town board, especially as the political board, and we deal with it, but even during the form-based code, we were really working, trying to stay in step with the town board and supporting what was going on with the form-based code. But a number of us have been talking right from the get-go, is before you start doing zoning overlays and changes, we have to come up, and we have the information from the public in terms of a vision. What is the vision? I think to just be reactive without being proactive. And, I mean, look, an application will come in, we can't change that. I mean, if they come in as of right, that's it, okay, fine. But I think this community really needs to be setting this vision. We never really did that. The form-based code had this idea, but what happened, it became really just a zoning effort. And you know, some people agreed, some disagreed, but it went off the tracks right from the get-go because, and a couple of us were yakking about this right from the get-go, where's the vision? And our master plan has a lot of that information in terms of goals, but the actual vision, the concrete vision, what do we want? A couple of us have been talking about this for some time. Where's the there? What is it that we're going to bring people in this town to come into the community for? It was a mix. If you recall, we did this now. Some of the stuff is dated because it goes back to 2016 when we did the update to the plan. But we heard from people. They wanted a mix of restaurants. They wanted a mix of retail. They wanted a selection of housing. They wanted to see some rental housing. They wanted to see some market housing. They wanted to see vitality. That's kind of a broad thing. But how do we do that? So we have the information. We know what people wanted. And what they don't want, of course, is a traffic mess. And we identified right from the get-go, and we did it with the early documents, the secret documents. The challenge, the fulcrum challenge that we have here is parking, how that's going to work. And it sounds very gritty, but we have to resolve that issue. But before you do that, what is it that we want to see? And it's not a vision, is it a theme? I've thought about this a lot in anticipation of the meeting, but over the years as well. Why do people come to this town? And I think young people come here with their families, they come for education, they come for the schools, they used to come for transit. I believe it's a family-centric community. And people really will do anything for the kids and intergenerational, and that was really the thing here. So what is it that we want to bring as the vision that's consistent with why people come to the town? And I'm not really smart enough to know that. I can throw the question out there, but it really takes some time. And I'm not suggesting that you back off. Oh, we'll take another 2 years, 3 years. Look at the vision. No, I'm suggesting we have that information from the public from that study. It may be somewhat dated. It was 6 years ago. But I think it still, for the most part, is very solid. And I think the lens of post-pandemic, there's a new context out there, and I think, frankly, it's exciting. I think it's going to give us some different options. This parking lot is lying fallow. It's not going to lie fallow, but I don't know of any large company in New York that is not going to at least a hybrid situation. And the days of people going into that city 5 days a week, spending 2.5 hours commuting every single day, Monday through Friday, are over. You're not, as much as business might want that, and they've got the rented space, they're not going to get people to do it. So, I mean, I saw this in 2020, 2021, where I'm sitting there looking at people playing golf, and I said, how do you do this? Oh, I'm on a Zoom call. They just don't know it. But, they got a taste of it, and they're not going back. So, but I think the challenge for us is the vision, and that even means just North Greeley. So what do we want to see on North Greeley that's going to ultimately blend in with the ultimate vision that we want for the downtown hamlet? The same exercise, of course, would apply, we're not doing it, but it would also apply, it seems to me, for Millwood as well, the same sort of thing. But I think that to just be reactive and saying, well, it's 3 stories is okay, 4 stories not okay, what does it mean in the context of what we're trying to do, what we'd like to see? And I think the great thing about the form-based code was its attempt to try to give developers some sort of guidelines to help them. I think in my personally, the stuff in the hearings, that kind of stuff, it was, a little, not quite on target. But the goal of trying to help developers understand what we like, what we want as a community is critical.
So if I could,
Sure, I've talked out.
no, I want to support what you're saying about some notion of the there that could be here, right? It's just for here that could be here. It just did not gel as part of that long process. I think there was a lot of good that came out of that process, and I think the best part that came out of that process is that it drew the community out. And they got engaged, and they started to care. And I thought that they were very clear about what they were saying. So I don't think there's any, for me anyway, there's no mystery at this point about what the people, I'm not sure they know exactly what they want, but I think it's pretty clear what they don't want. And the opportunity to make something that might be more than residential retail development as the way to build out the town, the opportunity is here on the town-owned land. And there's a lot of it. And how much of it actually in the end would be reasonably available to develop is obviously a complicated question, but it's here. And you don't have any obligation to the development community to do anything with this land. It's up to you guys. So I think that's where that opportunity is properly placed. I think that North Greeley doesn't have to carry that burden. I think North Greeley can be a
Precursor, maybe?
well, not even a precursor. I think that it's just sort of building out more of the fabric of the neighborhood retail, the town residential, more of the fabric of the town itself rather than, the golden opportunity place.
Right.
And I think that that's probably reasonably the only thing you could expect out of North Greeley, given the nature of the properties and the landowners and all of that. So I would see the effort now would be to figure out what it is in the context of those parameters, building height, how much retail, how much affordable housing. Those, I think, are the questions that attach to the initiative that you guys are going through right now for North Greeley specifically.
So just, can I just
Yeah,
interrupt?
of course.
So you guys have both said something which I just want to highlight. So to me, there's a big difference between town-owned land, which is the parking lot and the property on North Greeley, other than the one parking lot there that's privately owned. So I always thought, the way you're really gonna get people here, and you're gonna say, we need to go to downtown so we can do this. And while we're there, we're gonna go eat, and we're gonna go shop, we're gonna do everything else. You need that anchor, but that anchor is gonna be developed eventually on town land. And for that is something where I believe, need to do big charrettes and really come up with a visioning for what we want. I personally want an ice skating rink, but that's neither here nor there. But we need that visioning, I think, is a much larger visioning. We also, though, need to talk about North Greeley, which we could say as much as we want. We want an ice skating rink where Rite Aid is. It doesn't matter because we don't own that property. So what I think we need to do is really figure out, to your point, what we can tell developers so they come in with a project, whatever it may be, and we say, you know what? This is great. We can tell you that the town really wants a restaurant here, or the town really wants to make sure we have retail. The town really wants to make sure we have a certain number of affordable units, so that we can sort of inform that development while still approving an individual project coming in. So to me, those are two different things. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No,
I
no,
just
I-
wanted to make that differentiation.
I think, what you just said captures part of what I was gonna say. I think to Eldad's point though, are we preempting or sort of advancing, or reacting. And Bob's point, I think we have to bifurcate North Greeley, where, first of all, there is a property owner, a private owner. Secondly, there is something of a ticking clock, if you will, because, we've just sort of extended out a moratorium. And, at some point, when a project or a proposal comes before the planning board or the town board, action has to potentially be taken, versus the rest of the town where a vision, to Bob's point, is essential and really doable. And really, to Tom's point, we've talked about this, the moment is really right because the community really is engaged. And so if we can jumpstart that process and keep the momentum and keep people engaged, I think the potential to put a vision forward is huge. But I think accomplishing some of the pretty understood objectives, you talk to so many residents, we all talk to so many residents. North Greeley is an eyesore was just basically a common theme. That to me is bifurcated from the vision for the rest of the town and the town-owned property. That's just, so I think it's consistent with what you guys are saying, I agree.
So I would
just
agree.
like to-
Oh, okay, well, I know you're the expert, I just wanted to,
certainly not
I
an
may
expert.
just call on people, because it's hard with the masks too, like I can't see, so Tara, why don't you go, and then you come in.
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks. No, I agree to a point. I do think when we talk about charrettes and what have you, as far as town-owned land, that's going to be a very involved process and a slower process, frankly. But to Bob's point, and Tom as well, having participated in many community development projects over the years, I felt right away that we were lacking that vision that sort of, we could coalesce all of these, disparate development projects around. And I do think there's a huge opportunity. When I first moved to town, I remember there was a whole conversation that was playing out on social media about what is the brand of the town. I don't know if anyone recalls this, and it got actually hundreds of residents, chiming in terms of, what defines our town, what do we want to be, how do we present ourselves, and this was all within the context of looking at the river towns, who I think the New York Times at that point had christened Hipsterbia or something to that effect, right? And so everyone said, well, if that's the river towns, then, what is Newcastle at that point in time? So I think there's an interesting opportunity to take that conversation forward, but we've had cursory discussions as a town board, very briefly in terms of, well, how do we move forward, and what can we do that really, picks up where the comprehensive plan left off. And so we did talk about hosting some type of a workshop or visioning session. I think we could do something that would be, expedited in terms of, figuring out what we want to do with North Greeley, and then that could be the precursor to a larger charrette type discussion around town-owned land. But we could probably achieve both.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think at this point, we're going to be repeating what we say, but I'm really happy to note that we've used the word vision quite a lot, and I thought from the outset of talking about zoning in this community with the form-based code that that's what was missing. And it wasn't necessarily a vision that was missing. What was missing is, I'd like to stress, is a shared vision. And the community was not involved from the outset. And the community got involved as a reactionary, in a reactionary process. And so I think we must avoid that. And I think that the most challenging aspect of this will be how exactly to elicit that shared vision. And how we do that without taking too much time in the process while bifurcating, what goes on in North Greeley with, coalescing that shared vision and how to bring that process about. So I'm viewing this meeting as the first step in that, because you're a major stakeholder as a planning board. And so while we don't have all of the answers right now, I think that this is the first step to, laying down a path towards achieving that shared vision with the rest of the community. Nan?
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that it is an opportunity. I understand that these are two very separate, the size of the townland versus North Greeley is very different, but I do think that there's an opportunity to look at it from the perspective of what are some of those goals that would then be discussed and sort of manifest in the town, on the townlands in a bigger way. So I certainly don't think we should look at it as completely separate you know, visions. And there may be certain things that we want to know are consistent, and just coming up with those very high-level ideas of what is it that we would like to see there and be cohesive at the end is important. Parking is one, housing is the other, retail, what kind of retail. So I definitely think that those are discussions we should have that would be the starting point to talking about the whole. Right.
Eldad?
So a few things. One, I mean, I like everything that I'm hearing, right? I think that there's like a lot of sort of shared sentiment here, so that's an awesome starting point. You know, Lisa, you called North Greeley the ugliest, street in town, and Chris, you also said something about it either being blighted or something. Eyesore. Completely agree. I think we're all on the same page, and I think it's almost like a gift that this ugliest street, this blighted, this eyesore, is, has vacant land on it, is walkable from like the core, is walkable from Bell, from Town Hall, from the library, from, really what is the core of our hamlet. And so that's like this challenge it's almost like it's a layup, right? It's an opportunity. It's such an opportunity, and so that's really exciting. I mean, I'm an urban planner by training, and so these are the things that excite urban planners. And so that piece of it is really exciting. And it's almost like, it's almost too easy in a sense that obviously we should focus our attention there. And so, I love that you're raising this issue. And the question of the vision and the town-owned land, I mean, that is a slower and a longer process, and there are lots of opinions, and I don't hate the ice skating idea, by the way. That's fun. I had not heard that before. Is there
Convert to a water park.
I was going, okay. In the summer.
Yes.
Right, yes, I got you, right, on its own. Nature does that. Specifically as to North Greeley and what might be of particular interest, I mean, one, I have a question as far as if you have any thought to what is North Greeley rezoning overlay? What does that mean to you as far as, first of all, geographic? What land are we talking about? And I know that it sounds like we don't have a definitive answer, but that is sort of an open question. And then, for me, regardless of the boundaries that we're talking about, it's like, what are we trying to get out of it? What is ultimately the goal? And then how do we legislate to that, right? And, from my perspective, housing is critical. I think people know that I care about housing in general, affordable housing specifically, thinking about a range of housing for both different size families and different families from a range of economic backgrounds is really important. That adds strength and diversity to our town. That's something that is
that would get people on the ground for the retail.
100%. And then as far as, in addition to housing, there's the retail aspect of it, or the ability, from my perspective, the flexibility to allow for retail. I think that's important. If we've learned anything from the last couple of years, is that we know nothing about the future, right? I mean, 2 years ago, today, none of us could have predicted that we'd be sitting around this table in masks, right? And so much of the discussion during the whole form-based code was, should we really be making these decisions in the middle of a pandemic, which are legitimate questions, right? I mean, we didn't know, and we still don't really know when this is going to end, but we know that the future isn't perfectly defined. And so flexibility when it comes to the ability to include more retail or more housing, but all that comes, I think, from anyway, those are the things that are relevant and important to me. I think all of that comes also with an understanding that there are, as you say, these are private-owned pieces of property, and so there are financial and economic realities. I mean, what's going to drive development? We can zone all we like, but it could just be for naught, right? It could just be something that sits on a shelf and nobody cares about. If we're trying to incentivize development, but development that makes sense for us and our town, then we need to think about how do we get that. Again, it's like, where do we want to get to? And then how do we sort of legislate in that direction. The other thing that I've been thinking about for 11 years since I moved to this town was my family and all the families that we know spend a lot of money in our neighboring towns. I go to Armonk, I go to Pleasantville, and I go to Mount Kisco, and we spend a lot of money there, right? And it would be fantastic to be able to spend that money here. And so then the question has always been, for me anyway, why doesn't that happen here, right? I mean, it's not like there aren't people willing to spend money at local businesses and shopping and restaurant and all that fun stuff. You know, my older son goes to Bell, and, you know, he probably spends the most money in town, right? I mean, the rest of us don't, because he leaves from Bell and he goes and buys pizza or candy or whatever. So how do we do that? What works about those towns that doesn't quite work about our town? And I don't know the answer. I have some thoughts. Parking is definitely a big part of it, right? It's an issue. I think there needs to be, oftentimes, you know, in retail, they talk about a critical mass of, you know, retail spaces, restaurant spaces, and that's something to think about. And so that's, again, coming back to like the flexibility as far as uses, I think is important, ground floor uses. But all just thinking about how do we get to where we want. Like, let's define that vision for North Greeley, define the boundaries. I'm probably going to be encouraging as wide a boundary as possible, just because, again, because of that critical mass. And we don't get too many shots at this, right? And in an attempt to preempt, you know, if we do 1 or 2 properties or 3 properties and it's successful, then we're going to have applications for others. And so let's sort of think holistically to get at a vision that we like. I've spoken for too long.
Anyone's there? Dick, did you have something to say first?
Yeah, I agree with everybody.
Tom.
And I think that one thing that you said was, well, okay, what would attract people? You know, ice skating, a water park, something like that. Well, very interesting. My friend here, for several years ago, put together, you know, what it would look like to change the whole intersection and have some of that. Now, it doesn't have to be where he put it. It could be someplace else. But it has to blend in so that it makes this a destination.
Mm-hmm.
And so one piece of his work was a swimming pool. That could be a second thing that is,
Remember that.
a second thing that could come to the fore. And he did an excellent job on it. And but the piece that I liked the most was trying to set up some small food things that would make, at least in the fall through the, the spring through the fall, a place where people could come and sit, talk, get something to eat, and there would be an array of other shops or something around that might help them come to this destination.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, where should it be? Could it be, in North Greeley? Perhaps. Depends on, what we can do with private land. So I think this is something that's doable if we get enough examples. And then as Tara said, well, okay, well, then we can get to charrettes and things like that. And we have to open a better hardware store so we have more wheelbarrows for the charrettes.
Yeah. So since you raised my name, I get to mount a defense. The pool idea. And I know, obviously, we all know and always have known that that's private land. But I've worked on projects where municipalities, public interest, and this could be way beyond the scope of what this town board wants to do or could do, but have done land swaps.
Mm-hmm.
And the value of the land on North Greeley as compared to the value of the land over here near the train station could be an attractive proposition for a property owner over there. And I'm not suggesting for a second that anybody take that on. I'm just saying that was the thinking behind that particular idea.
Mm-hmm.
I do know a little bit about retail, and I do know that you just can't wave a magic wand and say, this will happen. Because these are forces that go, it's like the weather, almost. These are forces that just go beyond the immediate ability for somebody to say, okay, we're gonna have 5 restaurants here, and the only thing we need to do is to be sure they have space to exist in. It just doesn't work that way. These towns around us actually work quite well as a combined destination, entertainment, restaurant, shopping network. And I don't have any problem going to Jacob Burns, right, to see something there, and I don't feel bad because it's not in Chappaqua. I sort of see all these towns as sort of being one larger community. And to put the burden on this particular hamlet to play a role that tries to compete with that, I think is maybe asking a little bit too much. To compete with that on their terms could be asking just too much. We need to find our own terms to compete on, right? Which is this special thing that nobody knows what it is, but it would be great to find out. I'm positive that it's there somewhere. You know, it's out there. And if it's approached properly, I think you could get a positive engagement. And I think this new board is the opportunity to be the new voice to bring those people in to do it. When it comes to North Greeley, though, I don't think that we should burden North Greeley with that objective. I just really don't. I mean, it's a 2-block, 3-block street. You know, the requirements are very specific, right? The property is very specific. We know all the landowners. And we know what the comprehensive plan says about this. Multifamily housing, that's the prize. That's the big prize. What is attached to that is height, right? These are the variables: height, how much affordable housing, and how much retail. There are really only 3.
Parking maybe, yeah.
Well, parking is,
Be built into the
yeah,
project.
gets built into it. So if we could unpack those 3 things and sort of put them on the table, what do we really know about retail and what's really appropriate here? We learned actually quite a bit in the master planning process, in the form-based code process. There was a marketing consultant on the team, and Bob and I asked when they came up with 1,000 units, we asked, well, are 1,000 units going to bring the kind of exciting retail environment that everybody wants? And she had to say, no, it won't. And if you look at the numbers, I think the preferred alternative was only an extra 25,000 square feet of retail. I mean, it's nothing. So I don't think that we ought to ask North Greeley to solve the wish list in retail. And we maybe ought to put that aside, have a conversation about it, and decide what really works and what we really want.
To Eldad's point, I mean, I'm not an urban planner, but it seems to me that North Greeley is in a lot of ways a layup to solve, right? If there are 3 large buckets from the comprehensive plan, to solve one, which is multifamily housing. And then, you know, to the extent that we have any levers to pull, because there is a discussion about what the zoning needs to look like. Obviously, as of right, they could build a 3-story building with retail on the first floor, or commercial on the first floor, and 2 residential above. But let's assume that that's not what comes before the planning board. Then we have some levers to pull, I would think. Then, you know, the question is not to ask North Greeley to solve retail for the town, but to say, okay, we want a food, sort of something additive that creates a buzz in town, right? Some sort of new restaurant concept or something. That would be, to me, an amazing, you know, component of that, and it wouldn't have to put too much of a burden on North Greeley. So you could solve one of those buckets, which I do think would be a layup, and then get something really beneficial for the town.
I appreciate the initiative and the idea, and I think that would be great. I do think that, just for example, restaurants are the hardest business you can do. They fail more than almost any other business. I mean, Eldad is nodding, and I think that,
You're right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And to go to a property owner and say, you know, we'll let you, but you have to have a restaurant, and it needs to be a particular kind of restaurant, right? So I think the market decides these things, right?
Well, I think that's where the flexibility
That's the key.
Right.
comes in.
That's the key.
That's the flexibility part,
Yes.
right? So I think that's fine too. So, you know, that could be the answer to the retail question, which is have flexibility on the ground floor, let it happen or not happen. It will be residential until it does happen. And if it is residential until it does happen, well, we've actually solved some of our multifamily housing problem, at least in the interim. And maybe it'll have legs, you know, I don't know. But to put the specific requirement of retail, I think might be a bit of a mistake.
Well, to me, I've been struck, and for a while now, but certainly the last number of weeks too, I've been walking into town from past the library, from past the post office, and North Greeley, I mean, that could double the size of our downtown retail district. I mean, it is flat, it is straight. I mean, like you said, it's a gift. I mean, you could be at Starbucks and you look down that street and we could do something amazing with it and really double the vibrancy and the whole retail district in addition to putting multifamily housing there. But I really do think we have an opportunity, and I'm not saying we should say to a developer, you need to put in X store. But I would be worried to give up sort of a retail, restaurant, commercial type mix for solely housing, because I think while we need housing there, I think it would be a real miss to give up what could essentially double the size of our retail district.
Well, I think what's interesting there is it's really ideal for a pedestrian-oriented development because of the lack of traffic. You know, the other sections of town are pretty heavily trafficked, which,
Well, it also doesn't have the physical
Tunnels and-
constraint of the hill.
Yes.
I mean, going up
Right.
King Street is just it's a wall.
And
I- you know, I agree.
reducing some of the
It's a great
parking.
opportunity there, but I also think that in order to have successful retail and have successful restaurants, we need an anchor, because that's the key. We can zone on North Greeley for mixed-use development, housing and retail, and still come up short with successful retail options. You can have stores that open and they close. So the question is how to get feet on the street, how to get a critical mass, and I think that's going to have to come about with some sort of anchor that's either recreational or cultural. I mean, that's how Pleasantville started to revitalize. They had Jacob Burns. I absolutely don't think we need to compete, to your point, Tom. I think we need to be complementary. You know, I also agree that I see our neighborhoods as really one big community. And so I think that Chappaqua can have a lot to offer, in addition to these other towns that would cause people to really want to be up here and visit all of our towns. So whether that's an ice skating rink, whether perhaps, since it's a family-oriented community, we could have one area that perhaps has something like a children's museum. I mean, I've seen children's museums in the city where there are a lot of activities and different exhibits. We don't have anything like that here, so that could be interesting. There are a host of different ideas out there. We can be very creative, but I think we have to think in terms of an anchor, and that's either cultural or recreational. And we
Right,
already
and
have a lot of
that's what we said
recreation.
before, but that's not gonna happen on North Greeley.
Right, that's town.
That's gonna be town land.
Actually, yeah, I'm not really thinking exclusively of North Greeley. You know, I think that we have a lot of exciting opportunities right now. Town land is something that I think we must be able to utilize to our advantage. So I'm looking at this from a comprehensive point of view.
Right.
North Greeley is just one area, and of course it can't solve all of our problems. So this can't be an ad hoc, discussion. We have to look at things in a comprehensive way,
The solutions on,
including town property.
the solutions on North Greeley cannot be inconsistent with the rest of the vision. And that's why I was talking about, I think there's a holistic vision for the entire, what we want. And then North Greeley, of course, is gonna solve a lot of those issues. But if we do it again in isolation and only looking at North Greeley and solving just for this easy stuff, the layup, as you say, we have to be sure it's consistent with the rest of the retail and the balance of the town and what we're thinking about for the balance of the town, the public property, et cetera. So I couldn't agree more. I think we've been talking about this for a long time. I mean, you've actually named it as cultural, whatever, an anchor. We've been talking, it wasn't us, it was actually the consultant who kept telling us, yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a there. He kept talking about, we're going to have a there. This is the reason why we're going there. So it's not just that it's the people in the hamlet who are staying in the hamlet, it's the people in the surrounding community, town, outside the town, coming in as we go to Pleasantville, as we go to Armonk, as we go to Mount Kisco, Tarrytown, wherever we go. that was it.
And
And
And what was that exactly?
They didn't deliver.
Was it Tortigalis?
We don't
or
know,
this
that's
was-
what
What
we
was
need to
the, what
determine.
was the there that the
The Delaire-
consultant
They
was-
didn't deliver. They gave us a big, my take on it, they gave us a really, really big residential development down here at the train station with a semicircular park that could have a skating rink in it, could have some public
it
attraction.
was like a
But
a
we
coin
always
pond.
need,
Ill-defined.
we need the reason that, exactly, that's
Yep.
kind of how we started the conversation where I said, we need a reason that people can say, I want to go to the Chappaqua Hamlet to do X, and let's go. And when we're there, we're going to go eat, and we're going to go shop, and we're going to do everything else. That's how we're going to end up revitalizing the
Right.
town. But again, I don't think that that there is going to happen on North Greeley. And I think while I agree that we need to look at everything, you know, cohesively, realistically, it's going to take much longer to come up with a charrette and to really figure out what our there is on town-owned property. And I think sooner rather than later, we are going to get a proposal to come in for North Greeley that we're going to need to consider. And so to me, that's a little more pressing to figure out what is it that we as a town want on North Greeley, so that when something does come in, whether it's one proposal, whether it's two, whether it's five, we at least can say we're willing to consider X, but we want to make sure that you, developer, are also going to incorporate Y and Z, or we're not willing to consider whatever it may be. And I think that's where we are going to need to start with, you know, local input, but also here to figure out, while we can generally look at it cohesively, we still are going to need to figure out in the shorter term, I believe, what we're going to do on North Greeley.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. Short term on North Greeley. Oh, sorry, I'm talking out of turn.
Jeremy.
But-
So
go ahead.
I agree. I think that it sort of is a layup. What, was that you who said that term, or you said that term?
I think
North
we
Greeley?
both did. I think it started with LDAT.
We'll run it back. I think it is a layup, but also at the same time, it's not a sprint. I don't know if it's necessarily a marathon to rezone, but it's certainly not a sprint. One of the things that we've discussed, and we'll discuss, I'm sure, further is, and Eldad, I believe you brought it up, was what are the borders for North Greeley in terms of how far it extends south, how far it extends north, where does it go to the east or west side? And to Bob's point, and I think everyone else has also discussed it, how does it holistically integrate the rest of the town? You know, you look at, for example, Lutheran Church, that's still going to be sitting there with nothing happening for years and potentially years more. The Village Yard, which could potentially be a valuable property, and then the parking lots certainly are something that are we need to examine. And that takes a little bit of courage, because no matter what you propose, when I say you, us, anyone proposes, there's going to be pushback. There's going to be people who are going to be fraught with fear and danger and don't do it. I think some of the things that we learned from the form-based code is, among other things, that people certainly want to be heard. And I felt that some of the pushback was when I would say we should do charrettes just for the public land. We don't need to do it for the private land. I just warned to say that I don't necessarily want to go down that road of starting from zero, but there was clear voice of the people that was not enough. They didn't want just a charrette for the public land. They wanted a charrette for the private land too. This was something that went back and forth with. And I don't object to 4 stories on the west side of Greeley, but I think there are some people who will, and I think realistically that if we are going to maintain retail and affordable, and we haven't even discussed workforce, should that be an issue as well, how it's going to happen in its current 3-story zoning. So I think the sooner, if there's agreement, the sooner we get out in front of people and say, there's a very good chance this can be 4 stories, and start that conversation with people, let them know. No one's saying, in fact, it's guaranteed to be, but this is something that's really considered. And, you know, well, you should share your views on 4 stories, because if we're going to do all these things, these benefits to the town, which would be healthy retail, which would be healthy diversity of housing, it very well may have to be 4 stories. And we very well have to have these conversations now about our public properties, whether or not we actually do anything with them now. So I don't want to bifurcate it, but I certainly want to prioritize the quote-unquote layup, because that is the space that needs to be utilized now while we have the opportunity.
And I was going to say, just putting on a developer hat there, that's exactly what Jeremy was suggesting, is once you put in all these restrictions and you talk about what is really viable, you are going to look at, increasing the height. And I don't know about the conversation right away, but definitely we would have to talk about what those 4 components are. If it's retail housing, affordable housing, what that retail is. Maybe it's a smaller retail, maybe it's retail that is still an anchor point to this entire street that will eventually have things from the town-owned land sort of linking it. So in that sense, there is some creativity in terms of thinking of what is that retail experience as you walk down. But I think at the end of the day, something's going to give if we're going to have all these different things on that piece of, especially on that piece of land.
It sort of solves, it really resolves itself.
The
If it-
market's going
If
to
it's consistent
force you to.
with the vision, it's a very easy sale then. If you say what we're doing here, when we need 3 stories or 4 stories or 23, whatever, just be absurd. But we need X, Y, Z because we have these various things that we have in our vision that we want to solve. Multifamily housing, no one's ever mentioned it, but senior housing, there's nothing in this town at all for senior housing. Workforce housing, market housing. I mean, this is what the community said back in 2016. They wanted a mix of things that are not out there other than the single-family house, which is what we mostly have in this town. So these kinds of things, and if we say, look, if you want these things, and we want some retail, we want vitality, it sells itself, because you're basically saying it's not gonna work in 2 stories or 3 stories, or it has to work, maybe it doesn't work in 4 stories, whatever it is. But when you put that into the equation, and you have the space, which is gonna be well-defined, then you say, this is what it has to be if we're going to solve these various issues. And then it seems to me, it's not a sales job, we're snowing people over. You're basically saying that we're all coming to the same conclusion. That's what we need to do in order to meet our vision for that end of the town.
Right, and alternatively, we may realize in doing this process that if we can get everything we want, but we need 6-story buildings, let's say, we may say, you know what, we don't want 6-story buildings, so we're gonna realize that there are things that we're gonna do without as a community,
to-
and we're okay with that, because we don't want to tolerate, let's say, the
And maybe
6-story
those are
buildings, you
different
know?
options, like there's live work units, or, so we're looking at a different kind of retail. So like, I think that's where the creativity of what's the kind of housing, what's the kind of retail, is there flexibility? And that's something we need to bring out there to the developers and say, have you considered? Have you
I have a
considered?
question
to that
about
point,
that.
Lisa,
Just say
um,
something.
And then
Um,
next.
And Tom was talking about this before, and you brought it up, and Connor as well, just this idea of, it's a little bit like a game like Whack-A-Mole, right? Like if we want to just like lower the height, then we have a different issue here, and if we solve this issue, like maximizing affordable housing, then we have a different issue, and we have a retail issue, and it's just like we probably can't have it all, right? And that's just a reality, right? I mean, there is no utopia, right? But we're going to try to make this town as close as possible. But I do think that we need to, and this is where it gets hard, right? Is identifying priorities, and then focusing in on those priorities, being willing to give up something, because we can't have it all, and then agreeing on that. That's kind of. That's almost like your problem, less our problem, Yeah, but that is the hard part. Now, and I'll say again, it's no secret that I am very supportive of multifamily housing in this town. What I think one of the greatest social justice issues of our time is exclusionary zoning throughout the suburbs of New York State and throughout this country, meaning very few opportunities in towns like ours for a broad and diverse, socioeconomic range of households, based on the fact that there's too great a proportion of single-family zoning in towns like ours. And so this is an opportunity to address that very real and very important issue. It's not going to solve it. I knew your finger was going to come up, Tom.
Vicky's next, Vicky's next.
That's right.
And then
Yeah.
at some point, we're
Which
gonna have
finger was
to.
it?
There are,
Pretty cats, you know.
there are trigger words, I know, for Tom and I, but just, I know we're not going to solve all of society's ills by rezoning North Greeley, but we do need to identify what are our priorities, what's important to us, and how do we make incremental steps towards a more, a better town.
Agree. I wanted to pick up on something that Kanan had said a couple of times about the retail experience, and I'm just curious about how you control retail development. Because you can zone for retail, but how do you control what retail actually comes in? So I was curious about your thoughts about creating a retail experience.
No, so
based on- Yeah.
I don't personally think that you can control exactly what kind of retail you bring in there, because that is going to be controlled by the economics of it, and that has a lot to do with how many people are going to be walking through it, and what is it that, at the end of the day, there's the destination piece that I'm hearing people talk about, is that it brings you there, and so you can have one or two of those, but you can't have an entire street experience based on that. That is going to be driven by the market and by the density. And that's where we have to decide is, do we care about that do we want that density because we want that experience? Or are we willing to have one or two anchor points that we will experience and we will like, and we will, or even for the town-based land, is like, it's a big, and I think Tom said that during our many discussions, it's a big piece of land. We have the ability to have a master plan, and I think you said it more eloquently, like that is our opportunity, and maybe that's the highlight. But the rest of it is.
Can I just answer that question, just that specific question, if
Can you answer it in like 1 minute?
even less?
Okay.
I'd like to answer it too.
Okay, because.
Sorry,
we're
Tom.
going to
It-
Give each 30 seconds.
Each got 30 seconds.
Professionally, I have expertise in New York City zoning, and there are attempts to do what you're suggesting. They are not.
I'm not suggesting. I'm
No, that you're asking about. Like, how do we legislate, retail, specific types of retail? It is very hard. There are ways to do it. It's not always successful. There are ways, saying no banks on corners, or on the Upper West Side, they limited the frontage of retail so as to avoid sort of larger stores and to try to get towards like a mom and pop situation. It's hard. I don't know that it works in a town that really doesn't even have that kind of demand here.
So
But to save
my-
time, I
my-
would-
No,
my
Tom, you got
answer-
30 seconds, and then I'm moving us along.
My answer is that you can legislate what you can't do, and we have those in our code. You can't put a car wash, for example, in downtown, in a specific zone. So you can legislate what you can't do, but you can't legislate the fine grain of what you can do. The way to get what you want, if you have a vision in retail, and this is not going to be possible on North Greeley, is to find yourself a master developer who knows how to do this stuff and packages the whole thing and markets the whole thing and helps you and does the finance stack in order to pay for it and gets the tenants and the retailers in. That's how it gets done, like in the bigger sort of real world out there, and it happens all the time, and it's happening more and more in various locations, and it tends to be very successful.
It's happening in
All right,
Westchester.
so I need to move us along because it's 8:19 and we haven't talked about anything else. But what I do want to think about, because obviously we're not going to solve this in one meeting, is these discussions are great, but we also need to figure out how we're going to move them forward. So if you guys want to think about it, your next meeting, and we're going to think about it as well, ways that we're actually going to move this forward, that we're going to solicit the input we want, that we're going to figure out what we're going to do to rezone, and whether we want to do overlay districts, whether we're going to reclassify certain types of properties in town, however, we're doing a floating zone. However we want to do that, we need to look at that and then figure out how we're soliciting the input we want, not for the larger charrette. I think that in some way is easier because while it's a much longer, more involved process, I think it's much more straightforward as to how we're going to solicit that because we can make that so large. But on an area like North Greeley that is privately owned, how are we going to both solicit the input we want and move this forward? So if you guys can think about that at your next meeting, maybe put that on an agenda, and we'll think about it, and then we can have another joint meeting and discuss.
Yep, will do.
Okay, good?
Yep.
And the subject, or can I make one last
Yeah.
comment? Real quick. In terms of North Greeley and the objectives there are essentially, as far as I understand it, already in the comprehensive plan. That's already been legislated. That's your policy touchstone. You have heard from the public already ad infinitum on, I think, on those policy statements coming manifest in a form-based code. I think, my guess is that on this subject, there is fatigue out there. And what I would do is I would go back to the core principles of what you want to do with that echo of that response already in your mind, and then move forward. And the solicitation I think you ought to get is from developers, from property owners, real hard stuff on what it actually takes to build, not plan, but build. That's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I know this was a lot. I'm happy with this discussion. I think it was really great.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you. All right, I'm going to move around the agenda because I actually think the alternate planning board member is a little easier. We proposed this. We saw your memo. I think I certainly agree with your memo, and I think most of the members of the town board do as well. So this is my prime proposal with regard to the planning board members. Keeping in mind that one of the goals is to kind of streamline your processes. I think having 1 or 2 alternate planning board members who can basically sit on the dais with you and ask the same questions and essentially serve as additional, though alternate planning board members, is not the way to go, because I think that's only going to serve to lengthen the process as opposed to streamline it. But I do think that there is a value in having alternate planning board members if somebody needs to recuse themselves from a project, or if somebody has a long absence because they're ill, or somebody goes on maternity leave, or whatever it may be, to have somebody who can step in on certain projects and follow those through. I think in that sense, that actually does make a lot of sense, and then it's sort of, they're more than welcome to get all the materials from everything, talk to you privately about questions, and it can also be a way to sort of train people so that they, with the thought that they would then pick up an actual planning board spot at some point in the future. So I want to propose amending what the initial law was to say that we would have an alternate member who really isn't sitting on the dais with you, but is there in cases of recusal or in cases where with any project being brought before the planning board that a member of the planning board is unable to participate for whatever reason it may be. So what do you guys think about that? And town board too.
I'm a little confused. My sense was that the alternate would not sit on the dais to begin with. And then secondly, if you're going to have an alternate, then a person has to do what you said, in that they get the documents and the agenda for each meeting, because sometimes we have people that recuse themselves or are ill or whatever, and the notice is short. And so I think it's unfair to, and I would like that clarified if it's not clear enough in the words, but it's a problem if somebody is just asked, oh, you're the alternate, come on up here.
Agreed. It would be for an entire project. It wouldn't be like you can't
Well-
show up at one meeting and all of a sudden the alternate's coming in to vote on a project that they haven't been involved in. It would really be that
But then-
you couldn't be involved in a project because you needed to recuse yourself. So that person is sitting there for the entire
I see,
proposal.
I see, that's clear.
Yeah, that's clear.
And in case of a long-term leave, like a maternity leave, that would especially apply.
Right.
That makes sense.
Or,
Or
God
visit or
forbid,
travel.
someone gets ill, or there's a
No.
long-term
But
travel or something
I
like that.
think there needs to be some leniency as to what an alternate could do. Because if you say, okay, you're going to be with this project until the end, then I don't think that's going to be very helpful in certain cases, where it's a long period of time, and that's the sixth person sitting on the dais because the other person has to recuse themselves from it. I mean, it's, if it,
But there would be 5 because one person recused themselves.
When a person recuses him or herself, I mean, the practice that we've always said is people they remove themselves from the room. No influence whatsoever. I mean, Jennifer's always told us that. I mean, told me that. Various occasions to leave the room, but in any event, it's that's what we do. So you really have that space for that person to come up. So it really is very helpful.
and I think it's easy to pick up on a project with some reading. They may have to have extra reading, but I'm just thinking of Chappaqua Crossing. If somebody were an alternate on that, they would in essence be a de facto member for permanency. So
More likely a suicide victim.
Yeah, that's an exception.
So a couple questions. With respect to the idea that this alternate would sort of be in training as to be a future board member, do you envision that as sort of legislated in, or it was just be sort of de facto, like this person knows what they're doing and would be a good candidate when an opening came up?
Exactly.
It wouldn't be
It
either
wouldn't be a
promised-
commitment.
Wouldn't
No, no, no.
promised or committed to in either direction?
No.
Okay. And so, and I understand, first of all, the distinction makes sense, also that the way you've changed a little bit the way you've described it now, it makes sense. To me, it feels like a solution, certainly, I've been only on the board 2 years, so it feels like a solution to a problem that hasn't existed in the 2 years that I've been on, but I know that 2 years is nothing compared to some of my fellow board members, and so
So 4.5 billion years.
so
yes.
I defer to you guys a little bit about whether you think that this is necessary. I mean, 2 years, 2 years is a blip, right? And so, and also it's been a weird 2 years, and so, and I like the idea of thinking forward, right? I mean, trying to solve a potential problem down the road instead of being stuck and all of a sudden we have, an issue where we're down someone for whatever reason and then we don't have someone to, pinch hit. But do you think, it hasn't been a problem in my 2 years, but has it been in the past? And do you think that this could be helpful going forward in any meaningful way? I mean, again, I don't see it having been, just with my experience, but granted it's limited.
I don't know if I would describe it as a problem, because no matter what we've been able to get through, we have to get 3 votes. So we've been able to do that. Have we had certain cases where people had to, they've recused themselves? Yes. And so we've only had 4 people. So I think it would be helpful and useful, and it would be, a good place to get some training. We haven't seen it, I don't think, recently, but we have seen it perhaps just before you joined the board. There was a member who had to step off of an application. I know I've had to step off an application or 2 over the years. So it seems to me it's, and these have been strange times, and we've been at home, so we're always available. We just turn on our computers, but there were times when, in years past, where people were commuting and they just couldn't get here in time. There were schedule changes, and they were going to be on long-term projects, and it was just not working. And instead of having that pressure on that person, who in some cases they felt obligated to leave, perhaps if they just took a leave and we had an alternate, that it might assuage some of those issues.
So
But I wouldn't consider it a problem. I mean, we've worked it out.
yeah, I don't, again, I think that, and I think it might be a solution in search of a problem, because in all the years that, thank you for pointing that out. In all the years, I really don't remember, and there must have been 1 or 2 times, where we couldn't meet because we didn't have a quorum. And so the meeting happens, right? And we only need 3 votes in order to do it. So, and in all my years, I can only remember honestly 1 or 2, maybe 3 applications that were denied, which is astonishing given all that time. I think which is testament to the fact that we're probably doing a pretty good job as constituted, not just the people, but the structure. And I don't remember either, Bob, maybe you can refresh my memory, where we had an absent member and we were hearing an application and we said, well, wait a minute, so-and-so's not here. Let's table this, even though we had a quorum, let's table this in order for that person to speak. I don't think we've ever done that to an applicant because it's not the applicant's fault, right? That somebody's not there. So, I'm just trying to figure out what the real, actual, practical benefit is, given what we understand to be the history. And just as an aside, I'd be very, very careful about saying this is a planning board member in training if this person gets to vote on applications. I mean, if I'm a member of the public and somebody says, and this person is posed up as somebody's actually not ready to do the job, he's in training, that we ought to be careful not to use that language.
I understand what you're saying.
Right. I'm not saying don't do it, but
Perspective on this, being a completely new board member, not having seen this. So, and by the way, solution in terms of a problem is one of my favorite things to point out. But I would say that this was more of an opportunity because of the level of interest that was expressed in the position. So, from my perspective, it was an opportunity to reward that interest and attract people to be members, if you will, in training. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it, because obviously they're not planning board members. But that's where this interest in this amendment came from. Just the level of interest and the interest in, continuity and bringing people on board. It's an important function, so.
We did hear from people, they wouldn't be in training, they would be alternate members of
Thank
the
you.
planning
Thank
board.
you.
But we did hear a number of people said, you know what, if this position is available, I actually would be interested in being an alternate member of the planning board. Because maybe they don't have the time to devote right now to full term, but they want to be able to sit in, they want to be involved and read everything, and then be able to sit in when needed on specific applications because there's a vacancy on the planning board because someone's recused themselves or can't,
I think it's always important to capture that excitement and interest from volunteers in town. And again, there wouldn't be an alternate if someone sits as because we know it's someone coming on, it would just be a planning board member, period. That's it's a voting planning board member who's going to hear this application, yay, nay on the application, so, and hopefully the person has heard enough and watched enough, knows how we operate. So I think it is really important to capture that interest.
so
Okay.
I'm not
If there's a way of doing it, I think it's, it's makes some good sense.
I'm not against it.
Mhm.
I just was trying to understand the rationale for it, because it's a big move, I think, in town government to do this. And I think that the objectives and the interests that you post up, warrant taking a look at it.
Yeah, and I think the one last thing is that it's great that people want to have a shot at it and everything. One of the things that I think has two edges to it, but one of the things that works for us is that we're all professionals in that we've had a professional career in some related aspect. Except our legal leader here, who has learned how to do this decades ago when you all were children. So that's a.
Oh, well, they would be given the same considerations if they were applying as a regular, as a full-time planning board member in
Okay.
terms of
That
applications.
would be very important
Yes.
to do it to online.
Absolutely.
It would be seamless in
Yeah.
terms of the public, in terms of the applicant.
Right.
That's-
We're saying
that's
that it
why-
would be a 6-people board instead of
No.
a 5?
No, it would be a 5-person board with an
Okay.
alternate.
So that-
Who would only be sitting in if someone had to recuse themselves or there was a long-term absence.
And can I say that when this came up at our most recent meeting, when we discussed it, I mean, my biggest question was, where did this come from? And thank you, that answers that question, right? Now we understand where it came from and sort of,
Yeah.
because it felt like, where is this coming from? Is this a problem that I don't know about? And the answer is, it came because there was a demand for participation, and to Bob's point, if there is a demand, I mean, let's try to capture that in one way or another. I mean, it sounds like maybe some of these people, should just come to our meetings and participate in the public session, but But in general, I get it, and it's worth questioning, how can that be used? But the only other thing I would say is that, I would also defer a little bit to some of our experts and consultants that, this isn't a completely novel idea. It exists elsewhere, either on different boards in this town or on other planning boards in other towns. And I'd just be curious, what are the pros and cons of any expertise that we have elsewhere, kind of looking back in this direction? We don't have to answer that right now, but it's just something
Yeah.
that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right, so we don't need to go into right now, but I can tell you that our zoning board, or our architectural review board, for instance, they have alternate members now, and they're utilized when people can't attend or need to recuse themselves. And there are many other towns that have alternate members on their planning boards.
Right, great.
So, okay, so moving on, we're gonna have public hearings about this, so. Okay, so last thing, because we're running out of time, is streamlining the planning board processes. So, one of the things we heard also with the form-based code, in connection with all that, was that it takes a long time to get in front of the planning board, and we wanna cut out the planning board because it'll allow development to happen quicker. Now, there are many reasons why I don't believe the planning board should be cut out of the process, especially because I think you provide significant, valuable insight into any project. So I'm not in favor of cutting out the planning board, but I do understand that there are times when it can take a long time to approve a project. And some of that is warranted because there are issues with a project, but there's also a possibility that there are ways to streamline the process to try to get applicants in faster. And the town board appreciates, we know you've been doing a lot of work looking at that, and I know that some of these pre-meetings have been going very well, and bringing them in basically for one hearing has been going well. So we really wanted to sort of pick your brain as to what other areas you think, are you hearing, either from residents that it's taking a while, or things that you see that could be streamlined, and certainly the board's welcome to chime in, but I thought I'd address the planning board first. Are there things, and anything we can help you with to figure out how to expedite something?
I think it's a matter of always, of course, it's perspective. I mean, we have applications where members of the public think it doesn't take long enough at all, because they would love to have to see the application fail. So I think it really comes down to fairness, and we're really working hard. One of the things that we think we've really, and Tom led us on this, is in addition to some of the streamlining with, cutting down on the number of times, number of visits, we have done now one of these one and dones, where the people came in, we were ready, we went straight to public, and we had the resolution ready. It was, staff had told us and looked at it and said, this is gonna be easy, there are no major issues here, let's just get it through. Whereas in the past, we'd have to go through an informal, and 6 weeks later, we'd schedule for a public, have to do all the notices, kind of stuff. And then if something came up in public, it might be delayed. But for the most part, that's 6 weeks that we've curtailed if we can do one and done. The other issue is on ourselves. Well, two things. We're trying to see whether or not some of the applicants will be responsive to coming before us. Again, that's the wrong word, but meeting with us, so that we can look at something before they sink a lot of time, effort, and money into a project. I personally feel very badly, and we have one that's pending right now, where the person had in their minds what they wanted to do, and it's probably going to be very different from what they had in mind. And yet, you sit there and say, well, it's just one house, just going on a lot. It was pre-approved back years ago, but before the laws changed. So that would have been a great thing if we had been able to say, look, bring in some sketches, we'll tell you. And it's like, based on what staff is telling us, what our engineer is telling us, what legal is telling us, and what we see, this is not going to work. So that, I think, helps. And I think the other thing that's really, really important, and I think there's been some justifiable accusation of this, we're really trying to discipline ourselves so that when we finish a session with an applicant, we can tell them, here are the 3 things you need to do. We really are going to try to, behave and crystallize these things with the help of staff, with the help of Sabrina, with the help of Bob, and with legal, and say, before we leave, remember, here are the 4 things that you need to be looking at next time. You need to be mindful of these issues. Here are the issues. And in some cases, we tell people, you don't have to come in with, redoing all the plans all over with these gigantic sheets. Let's just address those 3 or 4 issues. Let's get those resolved, and we'll make progress. I've often said that I'm not going to name the attorney, but there was an attorney who used to practice before us all the time, and he had a strategy every time he came before us. He would tell us, I'd like tonight to get through the wetland issue, and this is what we're going to do. I got my wetland expert, and we're going to be finished with that issue. And it was very good. He would take, on larger projects, more complicated projects. But those are the things I think that we're really looking at, and I think that will really help, because there have been people who have left us as confused as we were on the project by the time we finished that session, and that's not good. So, and so we're really trying to add some guidance, and I think that will really help. I defer to others in terms of what their thoughts are. And also, by the way, I mean, again, we're talking here, if Sabrina and Bob and Jennifer have anything to say on this, I mean, they guide us on these things, so it's really important. They know the rules and the laws, so, they keep us on the track. So if there's something that they think is, I'm open to those suggestions.
Don't lose these people, because this is the best team we've ever had,
Yep.
really. From soup to nuts, and helping the applicant get to the point where we only have 3 or maybe 10, whatever it is, issues. We want to try and do it fast, but we have to not just do a sketch, in my opinion. There's some disagreement on that, but because a sketch is just a sketch. Photos of the site, easy to get. You can get them in Google. You can go with a camera. Things like that. And there's probably 1 or 2 other things that are easy to get, which would help staff do their initial thing, and then a lot of that would help get us to the right place.
So there's tell a little anecdote here if I can, because I think it illustrates the point. There's a foundational story from the architecture partnership I used to work for before I retired, and they were doing the plans for the Air Force Academy. This is back in the late 50s. And they're before Congress with the general who is responsible for the building of the thing and the architect, and they're talking to a congressman who is just proving to be very, very difficult. And they're all waffling up there, they're all over the place. And finally the general says, I would just like to get a yes or a no. And the architect says, don't worry, you're going to get a yes and a no. And more often, I'm not going to say more often than not, but often enough, that's the way we have behaved in the past. And the applicants leave, I imagine they go back to Sabrina or to Bob Cioli and say, what just happened? What am I supposed to do? And so this is a concerted effort we're going to make to, if there is any disagreement among us or any uncertainty among us about the instructions or requests we're making, that we will solve that right there and be as clear as we can. I also wanted to just point out that there are, for every applicant who might complain about, gee, it takes too long, they have to do all this other stuff, there are often neighborhoods of people who will come to meetings and say, you weren't hard enough on those people, who will actually ask us to do things that we can't do, we can't legally do. We have to explain to them, well, I'm sorry, we can't do that. If you have a problem with that, that's in the town code, you need to go to talk to the town board to see if you can get legislation to change that. And so I understand the people you probably hear from most are the people who don't want to go through the process, right? And that's natural. I mean, I didn't want to go through the process for my little garage addition, but I did. But for all of those people, our job is actually broader than to satisfy their feelings about the process. And our job is to, as you know, our job is to be sure we're representing the community, both sides. And when the community doesn't like what we do, they let us know. And so there are 2 sides of this. when they think we're being too easy on applicants. And there are lots of like high-profile projects where that's evident. I mean, there's some across town, there's some in town here where that's become very, very, one right across the tracks here. I mean, right across the tracks here, where we just got hammered by people. So, sorry.
So first, if I could echo Dick's praise for the staff. The staff and consultants are awesome, totally awesome, and make our job, so much easier. I think, as much as I think that there is a place for, robust as-of-right development, I don't think that, the structure of the planning board is problematic in any way. And, I think that the attempts to speed up the process, what we've done, and then the help from Jennifer and Sabrina have been super helpful, and the changes will, have already been somewhat implemented and will be helpful. I think the structure works. I think that where the problems lie sometimes are not in the structure, but in the personalities, both of applicants and of board members sometimes. On the applicant side, if they don't want to listen, then there's not much we can do. Right? If they get guidance from staff or the board and then don't take that, then it's going to be a lengthy, difficult process. They're going to keep coming back, and we're going to say the same things over and over again. We try to be consistent. And if they don't listen to Sabrina and the rest of the staff, that's, they may come away saying the planning board process is broken, but really that's not the issue. And so that's on the applicant side. And on the board member side, when I say personality, and this is something that we disagree on a little bit. We've had this discussion about, like, what is within our purview to ask questions about. And there is a legitimate and healthy disagreement about, if someone comes before us with one question, does that then open themselves up to additional questions with it, sort of this elastic clause of comments towards a greater good of planning a site? And that can be challenging at times to handle. And that's where sometimes maybe we need to be a little bit harder on ourselves to send the app, not to have sort of
Mission creep.
Mission creep, exactly. Mission creep. Thank you.
I happen to disagree with you, but that's.
This is what you can expect at a typical planning board process. I appreciate it. Exactly, mission creep, and I do think that we sometimes engage in mission creep more than we should. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Tom does not, and so and that's fine. But maybe that's where also an applicant will say, I came in asking for a lot line change, and all of a sudden I have to change the size of my pool, right? I mean, it's just like.
Oh, we didn't have that. We
Well,
didn't have that.
It's just it's just an example.
Exaggeration, I got it.
An exaggeration, but you understand my point, is that, so I think that's where maybe we can do better, but I don't think, again, that you can legislate that. I think that the structure is pretty good.
So one thing, we've talked about, and we talked about this a couple of months ago with staff and with council, was just getting a sense, certainly as the town board, of what sort of key performance indicators, if there are any, timeframes, right, over time, number of applications, sort of average time frame, number that have taken longer than a certain period of time, number that took a certain period of time and were denied, number that were approved, just to have a sense. Because while it's certainly in your purview, we hear about it too, right, from residents.
I'm sure you do.
And, when people talk about what can we do about the planning board process, and we say, well, we're talking to the planning board, we're having a joint meeting, they're streamlining the process, but as for me, I have no concept of what that really means. So that would be helpful, and again, we've talked about that, with staff to see if we can get something that we can at
It's
least.
very difficult it seems to me, been doing it a long time, to get real meaning out of some of those metrics. Because to Eldad's point, he didn't mention another group in here that's very important to the process, and that is the applicant's representatives. And more so than the applicant, more so than the boards, those tend to be folks sometimes who cause the issues in that sometimes staff will just throw up their hands and say, okay, fine, we've told you, you're gonna have to now go to the planning board, you're gonna have to hear it from them. Now, we have had applicants who have sought to tell our council what the law is in our town. We've had them constantly try to tell our engineer what the interpretation of the Westchester County Code is, and he's wrong on this, or telling our building inspector what the zoning law means. So you have that element, and, you know, it's very interesting. The applications are becoming much more complicated. So the planning board process takes time, but you know, also, some of the elements that add even more now is we have new laws. We have east of Hudson laws in terms of stormwater. We didn't have this before. And to get that permit from them, even if we finished with the Button Hook property for the Central School District 3 years ago, whatever it was, approved. And they're still now not finished because they had to get the DEP approval, they had to get stormwater. I think they just finally got some of the DEP approvals just in the last month or two. And we were finished 3 years ago. And in fact, during that process, I mean, the board didn't know this, but I was talking with Bob Cioli. You know, DEP was trying to undo some of the things that we were doing to protect our neighbors that we went through a public hearing over. And I told Bob, tell him if they do that, that was a very important thing. They may know stormwater, we know basements in our town. So if they want to do that, it's going to open up the whole thing. They have to lean down on this. So DEP, I mean, you talk to Chappaqua Crossing about what the DEP has done to them, what the DOT has done to them. I mean, we've been finished with them for a long period of time, and every time they do something else, we have another change, and we have to respond to that, and Bob and Sabrina and Jennifer now have to look at this. Take something that is a so-called public good, a public project. We just did the thing up in the northern part of town, the connection with Mount Kisco, the sewage. And I mean, I think we did it in a minimum number of meetings. We had the DEP application for the Croton River. Did that in a minimum because we had all the information. They knew what they were doing, and it was done. So the metrics are difficult. I think the metrics are not that indicative of the players. Our job, I think, though, is to get the players together faster and get the process going better. I think if we add that leadership, I think it will really help.
Yeah, and I guess just to clarify, I'm not suggesting that there would be a report that someone could present to us and say, okay, here's the problem, this number needs to go down.
Right.
I just meant, is that kind of, critical internal self-analysis done on a regular basis to sort of see, okay, now we can actually, review internally what's happening? Because you all would know, look, that scenario was because of this extraordinary
Right.
circumstance, or that scenario was because the applicant and its advisors were particularly difficult, and you can kind of discount that one. That was
Yeah.
really my question.
I don't think we've done any real internal assessment that way. I think we just have a gut
You just
feel
know.
on. I mean, I can tell you, I'm sure any of us could, in the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it might be, that here's an application that may have gone off the tracks. And maybe if we had guided them a little bit better, it would have been helpful. Maybe if we had, or if I had stood up and said, no, Sabrina told you what to do, and you have to do it, period. And then very, very clear. And maybe that would have helped. But a session or two.
Well, the line lot changes, that's not a problem. That can be done by staff, right?
Well, we can actually do it. I suggest that we go it's now one and done, and we can do that very quickly.
Yeah.
Jeremy?
Just jump in quickly. Here, I think, listen, if you can streamline, that's terrific. But, to Dick's point, you can do the lot line changes. That's something more in the realm of being a nominal, less impactful change. So I think it's a rhetorical question, and I think this is what you were getting at, and I could be wrong, so I don't want to put words in your mouth. But at the end of the day, does streamlining this process all of a sudden make, I'm talking from a developmental standpoint, not necessarily a single-family home standpoint, make development in the town of Newcastle, whether in Millwood or the Chappaqua Hamlet, that much more viable? Does it all of a sudden, if you can take a month or two off the process and save them some money, does that all of a sudden say, we're going to open the doors to the type of development we want in town? Or that but for the process to date, if it was much more streamlined now, we would see an entirely different, or a reasonably different hamlet?
No.
You wouldn't. So I think this is somewhat superficial.
Yes.
Because I know you long enough, and I'm pointing at you, but I know saying you all long enough, that you're still gonna dig into the weeds, and you're still gonna go into the details, and you're still gonna hold people accountable, as well you should. So, really, at the end of the day, I don't see this making that much of a difference in terms of what we can do for Hamlets. If people don't want to understand that very well, we may have to go up to 4 stories, that, that we're gonna have to discuss the train station and public lots, that we're gonna have to bend and give, as we discussed before. If you want this, you may have to lose on that. It doesn't matter what your process is. They ain't gonna come and they ain't gonna develop. So, it's important that we're considering streamlining, but far more important, which is a big issue, is the zoning.
Yes,
Otherwise,
absolutely.
what you do is really just, it's
And this
nice
is-
on the peripheral.
Even the streamline, we're talking about very, simple, single-family residential.
Right, right, I think it's
applications.
different, it's a different context than that.
Exactly
than
right.
it would be
Absolutely,
for
yes.
more of the bigger picture for the town of Newcastle.
Yeah, this was not just in the context
Right.
of developing downtown, this
Oh,
was
no,
just
it's
in
not
general. But it sort of sounds to me like, aside from applicants and their people not listening to you, that, I think you're right, that giving clear guidelines to applicants, and even if that's written after the meeting to say, this is what you need to do. And then to Eldad's point, no mission creep, like, no one should come in saying, I want to change a lot line, and you're telling them to make their pool smaller. Like, it should only be focused on what they're coming in to seek, and making sure it complies with our code and any other laws.
Well, there's a little bit of nuance there, because they will come in, just for example, they'll come in for a lot line change, and it will turn out that the lot line change will actually affect other things that have to do with wetlands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when sort of the Pandora's box gets opened from their point of view. But we can't just say, okay, you only want a lot line change, and we are going to abdicate our responsibility by not looking at the other things that are in play.
Well, right, but it should never be, you want a lot line change, did you consider a portico here instead
Oh, no,
of,
we don't do that.
this?
We don't do that.
It should be,
We don't do
of course, if it's kind of
Right.
germane to the,
Right.
You have to have a touchstone in the
issue,
code.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kanan?
Yeah, I guess the point I wanted to make is, being a new member, as much as we can streamline some of these processes, I think that you have a group of people here who bring so much talent and so much value in terms of the insight, that we need to be, we need to be ourselves cognizant of how we can give clear directions. But beyond that, there's a lot of clarity or depth in the thinking that we should be happy that we have on the board, is
Definitely.
my feeling.
That's what I'm
And
saying, I
staff.
think
Yeah.
you do a
And
great
staff.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't want you to think we were ignoring you, I was just trying to move it along quickly, so we can have some of the discussions off, out of the meeting too.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just in terms of your deliberations, because there's a lot of subjectivity involved, and, as in a lot of contexts, there's always an inherent tension between efficiency and fairness. You mentioned fairness. How do you decide at what point it is where it's enough? For instance, you're engaged in a discussion on a controversial issue. The community comes in, they're neighbors, they're people who want something, they're people who don't want something. And a discussion doesn't necessarily have an endpoint or a clear endpoint.
You're right, that is a problem.
And so that's where the subjectivity comes in. And are you able to set guidelines for yourselves in terms of what it is you need to cover and when it is that a discussion period ends for a topic, for instance? Just trying to figure out how you decide how long
That's a good.
that, these different portions of the process will take.
Well, I'd say that, first of all, there's not that much subjectivity, because I think we really use the code as our touchstone. And we're familiar with the code, and Jennifer keeps us on track, so that we don't go off and start doing something that we really don't have authority to do, or something that's outside of what the application is clearly all about. I'd say there's much less subjectivity than, for example, the ARB, because that's what they're all about, is really subjectivity to a great extent. So I think, I think it really comes down to First of all, it's great because we have 5 different people on the board, and we have staff also weighing in, so that we're getting good considered opinion, and it's very, very rare where we don't reach a consensus together. And by the way, the consensus also includes the applicant. So it may not be exactly what the applicant started with when they first started the process, but they're again, to Tom's point, I can't recall any rejections recently. I mean, within the past 10 years. And, you know, we come together and the thing is resolved. There's a solution. The application is approved and then they go off. Now, sometimes they go off and then they hit the wall of the DEP. That sometimes they very often, with staff help, we understand that they have to go to the ZBA. So very often, if we've, spent a lot of time on a project, we really send a note to the ZBA and say, look, we're endorsing their application at this point. We spent a lot of time on it, so, I mean, it's in your purview, you make your decision, but we want you to know that we're sending this with a recommendation. Sometimes we've actually sent letters saying we don't recommend it, but, that's
Or we're quiet.
very rare. Or we're quiet, no, that's.
I think that if you're asking that question in the context of your public meetings and the kinds of discussion and length of discussion and number of people involved in your public meetings, our life is nowhere near as challenging as that.
That's why you get the big bucks.
Yeah, I am trying to get
Tom and I agree.
But I do agree with you that we should probably have some sort of internal mechanism where we are sort of saying, this is going to be easier, the staff is telling us these are the points to consider, can we go through it faster? Or is there something where, I mean, we have enough healthy discussions where we are able to say, this is really not the point here, so we just need to do a better job at that probably is my guess.
But I think that we are, we give, if there's public comment, I think we do a very good job of giving everyone ample opportunity to air their concerns and to give input. It's not always concerns, it's not always negative, right? It's just all kinds of input. And, if I could pat ourselves on the back, I say I think we do a good job of being very fair especially when there are, controversial issues. And I don't think that the controversial issues necessarily are the ones that take a long time. I think the applications that take a long time are I don't know maybe I'm wrong, I'm just trying to think, that's not necessarily where the public is necessarily saying, I am against this, or this is problematic. It's just, the ones that take a long time, there's just a ton of back and forth between the applicant and the board. Is that fair?
They tend to be tough applications. It very often tends to be a big ask. We have code and we're sitting there saying, we're guided by the code, but you're asking us for something here, and we're trying to be consistent also, as well as fair. So we don't want to set a precedent that looks ridiculous for future applications or past applications. And I would say, and I'm not just saying this is a pat on the back for all of us, but I think it's a pretty rare situation where the process has not produced a better application than what it started out at. I have joked with some applicants over the years who were delayed 2 or 3 years in their process, and they caught the wind of the marketplace, and they got these bigger houses than they were thinking about, and I've always asked where my roses, I never get them from you people. But we have really come up with better projects, almost always, and again, because it's a concerted effort. And whether it's Chappaqua Crossing and how that finally developed, and well, it's still not finally developed, and where that started from and where it's been, and litigation and other applications. Look at some of the larger projects around here. And I think they're things that the residents can look to and say, we're proud of that, it looks good, it's an asset to the community, and it's worked out well. I don't think we've ever killed an applicant in terms of money, they've gone under because of the planning board,
All right, I think,
That's enough.
yeah, I think it's not, we're half an hour behind schedule. So I really enjoyed this meeting, I think everyone did. I think we should have these more often to go over issues. I think to your point about takeaway points, we have a few. First is at your meeting to talk about ways you think we can sort of move kind of the North Greeley portion at least along. And the other one is just to let us know if there's anything we can do to help you, you know, as things progress with streamlining processes. If you're seeing an application, and I asked staff to help with this too, if you're seeing an application's taking sort of, like, why is this taking so long? Maybe try to figure that out, and we can see as we go along what we can do to kind of streamline that. And I know you're gonna also give clear guidelines to applicants about next steps. I think that's really super important.
At some point, we have this project that's going on for years, and phase one is pretty much done. Now, phase two, we may have some meetings on that because, you know, it's a big developer and it's a big project, and the developer often sees things differently than we do, that type of thing. So everything else is small compared to that. But we look forward to most holiday seasons because that's where we have to wrap things up and things get done.
Good.
You know,
So any last comments from anyone?
This is great, thank
Oh,
you so
thank
much.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, this was really great, and we should definitely, you know, have these at least, I would say, once a quarter.
Yeah,
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 for sure.
okay.
Definitely. Great,
Okay?
thank you.
thank you so
Good.
much.
All right.
Not in
So,
shortage.
no, so,
We have to,
planning
to
planning board needs to adjourn.
Oh,
Well, we do too for our work session.
is there
Sort of
a
still in
motion
work
to adjourn the
session.
planning board meeting?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, very good, thank you.
All
Bill.
right, you guys get to go. Do we need to adjourn our work session, or we're just staying in it?
We just move out?
No,
Or
well,
we
this
can
is
stay
a
here?
joint work session.
All right, so do we move to adjourn the joint work session?
It's not a big deal.
Bye, Bob.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank
Good to see you.
All right,
Very
can
nice.
someone move to adjourn the joint work session and move into a regular work
So moved.
session? Can I get a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, Carrie, we're gonna take a 2-minute break wherever you are. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the town board work session. This one without the planning board. We're running a little late, but can I get a motion to open the town board work session?
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, take us away, Ed. Jill.
All right, I'm ready. The first thing on our agenda is evening out. They've asked for a 1-month extension. They are renting office space, unfortunately in Hawthorne, but, and they'd like to stay for another month. It'll be ready as of April. Their office space will be ready April 1. So I'd like to ask the board for permission for us to extend that same terms and conditions as before. We've got a whole slew of administrative items, payment of claims, adoption of minutes. Why don't we hold
Did you
this?
guys, yeah, let's hold that to the next meeting. We redid them a bit, but I'd like everyone to read them.
Just
and
look
make
at them
sure
and
you're
just
good
let me
with
know if
them.
you have any questions, if you could for next time, just because we really
Yes,
like to get them
definitely
posted.
next time.
Okay, that'll be wonderful. Okay, let's put that on for the 8th.
Yeah.
I'll get
Okay.
in touch, yeah.
Perfect, thank you so much. The next is the water rents list. This is something that most of this board hasn't seen before. These are delinquent water rents, water outstanding bills as of October 1st. Anything that was delinquent as of prior to October 1st. The law allows us to put delinquent water payments on tax bills. And so what we do is we send out notifications to those people with delinquent bills. We notify them that if we don't get their payment by March 1st, what we're going to do is take and put it as a line item on their tax bill. And you may see a tax bill from time to time that actually says water rents, and that's what these are. And it just gets paid with their taxes, and we're able to basically wipe our slate clean and start again. This is the preliminary list. It's within $1,000 of what was last year, so it's very consistent. We have some people that just basically do it year after year after year. There'll be a follow-up list probably next meeting that will come in a resolution. The town board will authorize us to put this as its line item on the tax bill, and it'll be paid, and that's it. Okay? All right. Any questions, you can ask me at any point on those. We are entering into an agreement with Auctions International. This is in order to sell our surplus material, our surplus vehicles and parts. We do this annually. And again, an authorization to declare some surplus vehicles. We have EV chargers that are being replaced. These are the ones at the train station. They have literally burnt out. They're being replaced. We've got brand new ones that are coming. The delivery is now March 8th. And so we tend to declare our stuff surplus before we get rid of it, and then we're allowed to dispose of it.
Can I just ask you one question with the DPW surplus, just
Sure.
in light of that last statement? Given that it's so difficult to get new vehicles, are we declaring things surplus before we have new ones?
These are, if we're declaring them surplus, we have a whole mechanic shop. It's because they
Okay.
can't.
Okay, I figured, I just wanted to confirm.
We don't, we really, we have our things for a very long time.
Vehicles or are these the containers?
Was that the containers?
One of them is for containers.
Oh, it's a 20, yeah. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I couldn't
These are
remember
the,
what they
yeah,
were for,
these,
but I wanted to just confirm.
yeah, these are
that
the
we don't-
containers. These are the ones that were in the park that they're trying to get rid of, yeah. That we just had stored in Warburg Park.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
That we're just trying to clean them up.
Just one quick question on the EV chargers.
Yes.
Just having looked through the correspondence.
Mhm.
Did we ever have there was no issue with anyone from a safety perspective, right? I mean, they posed a safety risk theoretically, but we never had an issue.
No. We've never had an issue with them. And actually, we were told they were beyond their useful life, and they're not supported by any software or anything like that, any warranty anymore. But we just left them there because we knew we were getting a whole new bank coming in, and we are, like, literally at the right time.
Perfect.
Yeah. We're going out to obtain bids for water treatment chemicals, which we need for the Millwood Water Treatment Plant, also water maintenance materials, so fire hydrants, every bolt, every screw that's used for a water main break, the couplings, somebody takes out a hydrant,
anything like that. It's not like you just go to the hardware store and get this stuff, so we have a ready supply of all of this material. We've got authorization to approve the 2022 annual ECI increase. It's part of our contract with Suez. It's an annual increase. Next is authorization to retain professional services. This New York leak detection was purchased by Ground Penetrating Radar Systems. I sort of like New York leak detection, but anyway, it's this group goes around and actually listens for leakage in the middle of the night. They drive along very slowly on the streets, and they almost, they have this listening equipment, and they actually are able to find a surprising number of leaks, and so we're able to be proactive before you actually see stuff seeping to the surface. They can actually detect it, and we're able to go out and be very proactive on our leakage. And we've been using them for years, and they've been a tremendous find for us.
So they knocked on my door about 15 years ago and said we had a leak, and it was our responsibility because it was the
Service line.
part of our line that connected across 117 to the town line. And under the town code, that's all
yours.
property owner
I'm
property.
so sorry. Yep.
So we had to hire a crew, close 117, break the road open.
Welcome to town.
It's really great. It's really
Sorry.
awesome. So,
Yeah, so sorry.
thank you.
Yeah.
But they do a great job, I will
They
tell you
do.
that.
It's remarkable, but they drive around in the middle of the night,
They
so
really do.
they
Cracker
flip
Jack-
people
Cracker
out from
Jack
time to
team.
time. Yeah.
Cracker Jack team.
Yep, so sorry. Authorization to use town property. Wall Street Rides Far is a bike race that comes through town. They've been coming through for the past 5 or 6 years, and just a nice group. Next is authorization to award the bid for Hubbard's Cupboards. This is our Meals on Wheels provider. We had gone out to bid. And last is authorization to attend a planning conference. And that's for staff. That's already included in our operating budget, but it's just so that you guys are aware. And there's one more thing I just need to mention to you. We had a meeting today on the new MS4 regulations that are being proposed.
Yes.
They are stunning, and I don't mean it in a good way.
I know.
You were kind enough to sign a letter that hopefully will grant us an extension from the March 7th deadline to put in comments. But the last time the state asked for comments on this was in 2017. I just want to read this to you. The MS4 operators commented on the.
Maybe just let everyone know
Oh,
what that
I'm terribly
is.
sorry. These are our stormwater rules and regulations, and they're rather stringent. And in 2017, there was a proposed overhaul of the MS4 permit, along with all of its regulations, that would have intensified the obligations that the town has under our stormwater permit, and put on some truly onerous, both in terms of monetary and manpower obligations for the town. And we were all disappointed to read this section of the fact sheet, which is basically that MS4 operators, which means us, commented that in the 2017 draft didn't appropriately consider resources necessary to comply with the general permit terms and conditions. According to the comments, the draft would require significant resources over and above what is feasible for municipal operations budgets. The MS4 operators also indicated much of the draft required additional efforts and personnel resources for tracking and reporting rather than the allocation of funds to stormwater management. And the groups commented that the provisions introduced in the draft must be fully implemented regardless of the necessary resources, which basically means that whether or not we have the monetary resources available, we are responsible for all of these obligations. Staff is in the midst of preparing a two-pager for you for next meeting, but basically it will obligate us to, for example, we have 2,500 catch basins in town. We're able to clean between 80 to 100 annually with one of our vac machines. It's a 8-year-old machine. They run between $700,000 and $800,000.
Oh, jeez.
Under the new regulations, we will need to clean the 2,500 catch basins annually. We will have to buy a new machine in order to do that. It will require additional manpower. We figure between 2 and 3 additional DPW staff, 1 driver, 2 laborers. And that's just one aspect of it. And
You have to,
Are
like,
these
sweep the
county
streets
or
twice a
state?
week.
their state, this is the E DEC.
And I will tell you that, obviously, this is affecting everybody. So, I did sign a letter along with pretty much every other supervisor in Westchester, asking at least initially for more time to provide them with comments, because they basically just, we had a very short period of time, so we've asked for an extension so we can provide comments, because I think the biggest issue that everyone has is that we don't have the money or the manpower to do these very onerous requirements. So they need to make these so that either they're providing funds so that municipalities can get the necessary equipment and manpower to do all of this, or they need to lessen the obligations.
So these are just overly burdensome,
They-
unfunded
they-
mandates, and there's no attempt
right.
to do any cost-benefit analysis, no attempt to
No, and we're
discuss
still
with
under
municipalities.
2%. I mean,
Yeah.
the 2% tax cap still stands.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you know, there's only so much money that we can take and allocate for this. We're working out the numbers just so that we have an idea as to what they're talking about. But, you know, just that one task alone puts us at $1 million. And there's going to be additional costs on top of that. We did reach out, Sabrina reached out to Warren Lucas just to find out whether or not he envisioned a single comment letter coming from the group, or if each
It
municipality was
seems
doing
like
their own.
each municipality is doing their own, but we are talking about also combining those to do a group one.
Okay, only because if it turns out that we don't get an extension, I would like to at least be on the record for that March 7th deadline to make sure that we've got some comments in on it, even if it's just, you know, how are we supposed to do this? And
Curious.
remain
I have what some of
fiscally
the other
responsible.
towns have done, if you need copy, if you want to
Yeah,
see
that would
them.
be very helpful.
Not that I'm advocating for non-compliance, but what are the penalties for non-compliance?
Oh, gosh, was it $64,000 a day?
Yeah, I don't
A
think
day?
we want to speculate.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no,
What that looks
DEC
like.
is really, yeah. And I have to tell you that, you know, we have had MS4 audits before, and we have come through with flying colors. And so, you know, as a municipality that took its MS4 responsibilities very seriously, this just seems like,
It's very
yeah, no good
onerous.
deed, that's a
What's
perfect
the,
way to put it.
remind me, what's the timeline, the theoretically, when would this?
Oh,
done?
it's over the next 5 years, and that's one of the things that we're looking at. It's, some of them are gradual implementation, other ones have to be done immediately. It also requires a annual, I mean, I'll list all these things out for you, but this other one stuck out in my mind. An annual inspection and also pump out of septics throughout New York City watershed, which would put the onus on our residents as well. And no, Westchester County is not stepping up as of yet to reimburse you every year for your septic, you know, pump out, where they do now once every 3 years for those of us in the Sawmill Sewer District that are on septic. And the town would be responsible for monitoring this and also enforcement of the septic, the annual septics. It's just, it's a fabulous amount of responsibility that they've thrust on us and no money to pay for it. So, you know, we're talking about administrators to take and administer the program software so we can take and track it. It's stunning. Anyway, to be continued, but I just have to tell you about that. We just had a meeting this afternoon and it was really, it was eye-opening. Okay, that's all I've got for the work session. I'm happy to.
All right, so can I get a motion to adjourn the work session, open the town board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, welcome yet again to now our town board meeting of March 1st. Happy Women's History Month to all the women in town. And I don't think we had any do we have any announcements, Jill? Do you have anything you'd like to announce?
No, just that we've got the Bossy Frog Band this Sunday, 2 p.m. Rick is putting on a Chappaqua Performing Arts Center. If you've got kids that are 10 and under, that seems to be the target audience. Go on our rec page and check it out this Sunday.
Yep, I've heard them before, they're great.
Yeah.
And also, as of tomorrow, masks will be optional in town hall.
Yep, recommended but not required. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna waive the supervisor's report for today. Everyone can read it tomorrow, but I do have a couple community corners we wanted to just announce because we'd hate to not announce these birthdays. Some of them already happened, but they were all on our electronic sign. So happy birthday to Will Acocella. He turned 4 on February 16th. And so happy birthday. And they actually sent a picture of him in front of the sign, the electronic sign. And he was so happy and it made me feel really good. So I'll send it. Did I send it to you guys?
No.
Oh, I will. It's very cute. Also, turning 6, Olivia Corollo turned 6 on February 17th. Happy birthday to Olivia. And a bigger kid, Elizabeth Tolosa, turned 13 on February 25th, just the other day. So happy birthday. And again, all of your special days were highlighted on the electronic sign by Bell School. I hope you got to see them, and I hope you all got a lot of birthday wishes. And we announced your birthday last time.
Thank you. Sorry I wasn't here for it.
All right, so that is it for my community corner. And anything from the administrator's report?
You know what, I'll just include it tomorrow in
Okay, perfect.
the.
All right, so now we'll move to public comment, new business. Anyone here who would like to make public comment? All right, Carrie, anyone online?
If anyone's interested, please raise your digital hand. I don't see anyone.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a meeting next week too, so if you have a public comment, you can hold it till then. All right, so next we have a public hearing. So we are going to open a public hearing about increasing the amount of tax exemption for qualified veterans. So can I have a motion to open that public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, Ed, do you want to walk us through?
Sure, so the board, let's do this. We had this on a work session agenda, I think it was 2 weeks ago. We weren't meeting last week, but, and Josh Herman, the assessor, was here to explain how the local law will align the veterans exemptions that the town recognizes with the increased maximums that the county has just rolled out. And we talked about, Josh explained some of the formulas that are used, but essentially the idea is that the veterans, qualifying veterans, receive a tax rebate essentially, and it's really a zero-sum exercise because the exemption is then spread over the entire tax base, and the impact on everybody else is pennies, but that's the local law that you have before you.
Okay, thank you. So we have opened up the public hearing. If anyone has any comments, speak now or forever hold your peace. Carrie, anyone online? Okay. So why don't we move to close this, hold it open for a few days for written comments in case anyone can't get to us tonight, or is there a deadline on this?
Sorry. So the reason why we actually rushed it onto the agenda this evening is because we want to be able to apply the higher rates to this upcoming town tax bill. So
what's the deadline for that?
So it needs to be done by the 7th, which is why we wanted to approve it tonight. So
Okay.
I know it's not the practice of the board, but in this instance, for this particular case where we're just extending a benefit to our veterans, we're hoping that the board will feel comfortable to be able to close it tonight and approve it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, we generally do make it a practice not to approve something on the night that we close a public hearing, but given that we have no objections to this, I'm comfortable with that. And for the reasons Jill stated. So can I have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Right, so then, as much as I'd like to keep you guys here longer, we can just move to our resolutions.
Excellent.
Anyone have those in front of them?
Yes. All right. Payment of claims. I move to approve the payment of claims in the amount of $363,031.49 for 2021 expenditures totaling $162,958.92 and 2022 expenditures totaling $200,072.57. Listed on the summary, pre-check writing report, and detailed voucher detail reports, all dated February 28th, 2022. Checks will be issued and mailed to each claimant listed on Wednesday, March 2nd, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Keep going, you can just do them all.
Resolution adopting a local law to amend Chapter 120, Section 2 and 5 of the Code of the Town of Newcastle to increase the amount of tax exemptions for qualifying veterans who reside in the Town of Newcastle. I move to adopt a local law to amend Chapter 120, Section 2 and 5 of the Code of the Town of Newcastle to increase the amount of tax exemptions for qualifying veterans who reside in the Town of Newcastle.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move to authorize the hiring of Stephen Farrell to the position of laborer 0425-05 within the Department of Public Works Highway Unit at the annual salary of $48,055.31, Group 2, Step 1, effective March 21, 2022.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anything else?
Well, we have the consent,
The
there's
consent
consent agenda.
You know what, we're actually gonna hold it,
Okay,
We'll do that next week.
these are the three.
all right.
All right, then can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Okay, well,
Thank
good
you.
night, everybody.
Thank you.
Night, thank you.
Thank you.